Across our nation, we are witnessing a full-on assault on hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights.
She was a bum 3 weeks ago. She was a bum, a failed vice president and a failed administration.
The race for the White House heats up with less than 100 days to go. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The US presidential election is a virtual dead heat in the polls for now, but the ground has shifted since President Joe Biden's poor debate performance and the emergence of Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. She has secured enough delegates to win the nomination and re-energized her party. Well, lots to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Niambi Carter is an associate professor at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Joseph Williams served as a senior editor with US News and World Report. Also with us is Eric Bolling, host of the Eric Bolling podcast, and Rina Shah is a political strategist and commentator. Thanks everyone for being with us. Eric, let me start with you. A lot has happened since we last spoke, and that was only, a few days ago. The Wall Street Journal has published a poll in which it says the presidential race is tied nationally. And there was a Fox News poll which shows that the contest is very close in the battleground states. It looks like the Vice President, Kamala Harris, has closed the gap with Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump now facing a far more aggressive fight for the White House?
I think so. I think, be careful what you wish for. The push to get Joe Biden to step aside was always a little misguided for me. I always thought they should continue to focus on highlighting his loss of facilities, his impending dementia, if that's what it was, but not push him out. And that's what they did. And they got a little bit, maybe more than they bargained for. And you're so right that the race has tightened. The Wall Street Journal poll you mentioned still has Trump up by 2, but that's within the margin of error. And the swing state polls still show Trump leading in all the swing states, especially the most important ones in Pennsylvania and maybe Michigan as well. So he's in a good position, although not as good of a position, not as strong of a position as he was prior to Kamala Harris. I think Kamala's success has surprised everyone. The $200 million that she's raised since they basically anointed her the nominee is interesting. But don't forget, there's not been one single real attack other than these small ones that you point out, Trump calling her a bum. When they really go after her record or lack thereof, and then what she has actually done, which is incarcerated African Americans in California, then they're going to see when the honeymoon, so to speak, is over. There's a very, very important soundbite. I don't know if you pulled it up, you're going to play it. But Elizabeth Warren yesterday speaking to Jake Tapper on CNN saying that the plan is to bring all these illegals, these, whatever you believe, 7, 8, 10, 12 million illegal immigrants from coming into the United States, to bring them a path to citizenship. That's everything every conservative has warned against for the past 3.5 years, and Elizabeth Warren laid it out on a silver platter. That will be the soundbite for the next 98 days going forward, I guarantee you, and that will cost her a lot of that upside that she's enjoying right now.
Yeah, Eric, we will talk about the situation at the border a little later in the show, but certainly the dynamic of the election has changed with the prospect of Kamala Harris being at the top of the ticket. But let's talk about Trump. This week he talked about the Christian vote. This is what he had to say. Let's listen.
Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians.
So that comment that he made there, you won't have to do it anymore in 4 years, it's got the attention of a lot of people, but nobody knows what it means. What was the president trying to say there? And there was one response from the Republican governor of New Hampshire who described it as, quote, a classical Trumpism, but that doesn't really explain it, does it?
Well, no, but I'm not sure he said you won't have to vote anymore in 4 years, Arnand. It sounded like he said you won't have to vote anymore 4 more years. And the way I interpret it, and call me crazy if you want, is that for 4 years, Christians won't have to vote. In other words, that you don't worry about the midterm elections, vote for him, get him in, and he will save, you know, the status that Christianity has had in this country for so many years that seems to be, you know, at risk for some odd reason, given the number of Christians in the country. It's very odd. I think the left will interpret it one way and the right will interpret it their own way. I don't think Trump means he's going to be dictator for life. I'm pretty darn sure he didn't mean that.
Rina, what do you make of the emergence of Kamala Harris as the likely nominee for the Democrats? I mean, we heard Trump's response. He called her a bum. He called her far left. But what do you make of it?
Well, I've always held differing policy views than Kamala Harris, but I think she's far from a bum. You know, that's just Trump going back to who he is, name calling, and just not taking what I think is the high road, which is to make this race now entirely about substance. Hit her on the policy front. You know, make the argument that maybe she isn't strong on, you know, border immigration, national security. Hit her on those fronts. Name calling her, I think, diminishes her. And the whole name of the game here is, what are independents thinking? You know, the right is going to think one way, the left is going to think the other way. But there's all these people out there, and we know, I've said it here before, 80 million people didn't vote in 2020. Only 57% of eligible voters cast ballots. That's a big problem.
And it is going to be independents that's going to determine the outcome.
Yeah, it's those people that are going to determine the outcome of this election, but more importantly, it's going to be women. And those women who are independently minded, sitting in these 7 swing states, how do they look at the moment? I think it's exciting to see the energy re-injected back in this race. It almost feels as if we were missing some sort of real representative democracy, because it felt like in this Biden-Trump rematch that a lot was lost. A lot of talk about what could be for America, that hopeful vision, I think was missing from really the debate, and I think she's injected that. Now, like I said, I've started by saying I've not been on her side when it comes to policies, but I'm willing to hear her out. I'm willing to see what she chooses to prioritize now. I'm willing to see how closely she ties herself to her boss's record,
Right.
Biden's record, and how she'll be different on many fronts, because that is what 2024 is about. And I think that's why she sees this grassroots support coming from different demographics. Of course, as somebody who's not a fan of identity politics myself, I do think there will be a moment in which she has to start to say, you know, I am going to be a president for everybody, something that Donald Trump has specifically said he won't be. And I just look forward to these next few weeks to see, is the honeymoon going to continue?
Right. Joseph, before I get on to what's happening right now, I just want to talk about Joseph Biden dropping out of the race. I mean, for months, Democratic leaders and Biden supporters have told us that he's fully capable, mentally and physically, to undergo the rigors of a campaign, another 4 years in office. But now we know that wasn't true. Were they being less than forthcoming? I mean, weren't voters owed a full explanation of what his health was like?
I think so. And I think it's unfortunate that it unfolded in this way and that it unfolded very publicly. I mean, there were many people, I among them, who thought that Joe Biden was fit to serve another 4 years. And he thought so as well. Evidence, you know, obvious evidence to the contrary. But I do wonder to what extent this debilitating cognitive problems are, if there are any, because none of us are doctors. I do think that he's been functional as president. I don't think there's been any mishaps. He has seemed to be, at least for all intents and purposes, a steady hand on the wheel. We haven't had any foreign blow-ups. We haven't had him misnaming a leader or anything egregious. So I think that speaks to the fact that he's still fairly capable of being commander-in-chief. But I think that it's going to be an issue that's going to be talked about. I mean, keep in mind, Ronald Reagan was debilitated towards the end of his presidency, and there was no noticeable impact on the country. But it is something that is very concerning because we don't know what we don't know.
Right. Okay, let's talk about the campaign right now, Joseph. And Eric mentioned it a moment ago, immigration, the border. This is what J.D. Vance, the Republican vice presidential nominee, had to say about that. Let's listen.
Kamala Harris is directly responsible for the worst border crisis in this nation's history. On her watch, more than 10 million illegal aliens have invaded our country, and it wasn't by accident, it was by design.
So, Joseph, if border security and immigration is a vulnerability for Democrats. How great a vulnerability is it?
I think it's significant. I think she's got to come up with a message on the border crisis. I mean, now, J.D. Vance, of course, is engaging a lot of hyperbole there and a little bit of revisionist history, but I do think that there's going to be a debate between her and Donald Trump, and they've signaled that that's where they're going to go. That's the punch that's coming. So she at least has some time to come up with a border message. I think that the citizenship issue, I think that's probably a far-reaching economic issue if you look at it on paper. And I don't know how angry people will be about making more citizens. But I also, more citizens and more taxpayers, more people who can help fund Social Security over the long haul. I think that's a win for the country. But I don't know if Kamala Harris has a proper message for it just yet. She's got a little bit of time to figure it out, but not a lot of time to figure it out.
Niambi, great to have you in the studio with us. I want to talk about another possible vulnerability for Kamala Harris, and that is in 2019 when she was running for the Democratic nomination, she was criticized for her job as a prosecutor and attorney general in California. And some of the things that she was criticized for, she withheld information from defense lawyers that they were entitled to. She was criticized by a judge in that case. She supported laws to prosecute parents whose children had skipped school. When a federal judge said the death penalty was unconstitutional, she appealed. She laughed about marijuana reform and things like that. Is that going to hurt her?
I think it depends on who you ask, quite frankly. I mean, she was the Attorney General for the state of California, so to a certain extent, she has to enforce the laws in the state of California. Right. She did not have the ability to write new laws. I do think some of that was tough talk, because I think this is a very difficult road, this criminal justice road for Democrats. I mean, on the one hand, you have a lot of people of color who are unfortunately victims in some cases of a criminal justice system run amok. Right. At the same time, if you're soft on crime, that also doesn't play well. So I think some of that conversation around, you know, holding parents responsible for the truancy of their children, at least what it seems it was talk more than actual policy in terms of parents being locked up and held responsible for their children's misdeeds. That said, I think it will come up over and over again. There are parts of the Democratic voter base who still see her as harmful, who see her as, you know, the top cop of California, and therefore don't necessarily have a positive view of her. But I think it's going to be a very tight rope in that particular criticism, because this is also a person who's looked very progressive on the issue. Yeah, right. So, I mean, I think it comes down to the fact that politicians say what has value at the time, and that's irrespective of ideology or party. And so people have to be a lot of people to a lot of constituents. Yeah. And so the things that they say vary wildly. And when we think about primary contests, people tend to be a little bit more right of center or left of center, because they're trying to be appealing to a base that is, I would say, a little more strident than the average voter when general election comes. Right, you use the word progressive there. In fact, the New York Times ran an op-ed at that time in 2019, got a lot of attention, that op-ed, and the headline of that op-ed was, Kamala Harris is not a progressive prosecutor. And we no doubt we're going to hear about that more now, aren't we? Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there are going to be some in the Democratic Party for whom she is not going to be good enough. Yes, she's re-energized the party because she's younger, she's a woman, because she is Black, because she is South Asian. Those are important things, especially because we've not seen it before at the top of the ticket. Right. I think we take for granted how much that is important. But when it comes to the scrutiny that she's going to have to face over the next 100 days, these things will come up, because there are going to be some Democratic purists, some leftists, who will not find her acceptable and will still vote third party. Eric Bolling, something that Kamala Harris is taking Trump on is the question of reproductive rights. And here's what she had to say about a set of conservative policy proposals called Project 2025. Let's listen.
So Project 2025 is a plan to return America to a dark past. Donald Trump and his extreme allies want to take our nation back to failed trickle-down economic policies, back to union busting, back to tax breaks for billionaires, Donald Trump and his allies want to cut Medicare and Social Security. You know, America has tried these failed economic policies before, but we are not going back.
So, Eric, Democrats have tried to link Trump to Project 2025 rather, but he said this, and I'm quoting him here, this is what he said. He said, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who's behind it." He then called some of the proposals contained in that document absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. But can he shake off those links to Project 2025?
I think so, Arnon. I think he did that by denouncing Project 2025. 2025 is a Heritage Foundation think tank, a plan policy that they wanted to somehow squeeze in there. And I think Steve Bannon was pushing that as well. And Trump is a very, he listens to Bannon closely, but he denounced Project 2025. Now, you do hit on something that's important. How does he negotiate the third rail of Republican politics, which is abortion? I think he's trying to do that by saying send it to the states. He's softening his tone on abortion. But again, you know, it's going to be, if they're smart, the Democrats will continue to try and tag Trump with some sort of, you know, women's rights issues, and then he goes ahead and picks J.D. Vance, and they drum up this ridiculous comment he said 3-4 years ago. That's going to hurt them, no question about it. I've said this for 3 years on this program. They just need to keep pounding that third rail of Republican politics of, you can't be hardcore in abortion in America anymore. You just can't. It won't work. But on the other side, this gaping wound that Kamala Harris has is being the tapped border czar. You don't want to call her that, that's fine. The person in charge of cleaning up the border for 3 years looked the other way. And then Elizabeth Warren opening the floodgates, saying through exactly what conservatives have been tagging them, the Biden administration, with, of allowing people to come in and looking for that path to citizenship. That will be their demise. I would almost guarantee it. If anyone on the panel wants to bet me dinner, I'm certainly down for that bet.
Rina, what's your view on Project 2025? Is it some kind of blueprint for a Trump presidency should he win the election?
Without a doubt, it's a blueprint. I spent many years, on Capitol Hill serving 2 Republican members of the House, and the Heritage Foundation was very influential back in the day. And I was, to give people some perspective, I was there when the Affordable Care Act passed, and we really followed their talking points when it came to what we were doing out of that office. So the Heritage Foundation is hugely influential as a think tank. It is the go-to, and it will be the go-to if Donald Trump wins the White House again, because who's going to work for him? Where do you get your people? The Heritage Foundation has already said they're keeping a list of conservatives who want to work for the next administration if it's a Republican.
But this is how it works on both sides, doesn't it?
Well, sure, but this discounting Heritage Foundation and saying, you know, nothing about Project 2025, that's all hogwash. I mean, that's a flat-out lie. His consultants have told him to say that, and this is the problem. When people aren't paying attention, they don't know who the players are, and they don't know how to really take into what's going to happen in their future. And the future consists of Heritage Foundation folks saying, we want to be more conservative, we will force Donald Trump's hand. And that's why when it comes to the issue of reproductive rights and access for American women, Donald Trump can't be trusted, because he's saying one thing today. If he gets back in the White House, he'll do another because of those people who surround him. And that's the long and short of it. When it comes to a national ban, I think he will enact it. Again, this all comes back to trust. Can he trust Donald Trump to really do what he's saying he'll do today?
Eric, you want to say something?
Just very, very quickly. Rina, back in the day, you're talking 20, 30 years ago.
No, it's not 20, 30 years ago. 2008, 2012, 2016.
16 years ago. 16, sorry. But here's the point.
Sorry, that's when I worked there. How do you know my professional history? Goodness.
No, I'm saying Donald Trump and the MAGA movement has pushed far away from the Heritage Group. The Heritage is known as the establishment Republican infrastructure in D.C. They've made...
They're very MAGA. They consist of conservative MAGA types. Cato Institute, AEI, American Enterprise Institute, those are establishment.
They don't align at all.
Okay. All right, Joseph, let's talk about the minority vote. Now, even before that debate that Joe Biden took part in, support for Biden among Black and Latino voters had already eroded. But now, according to a New York Times Siena College poll, Harris has made tremendous progress among young voters. That's another important component, of course, of any kind of winning coalition. In fact, in the 18 to 34 age group, she gets 60% of the voters in that group. So looking at all of this, and we don't know how the minority vote is going to change yet, how does that change the electoral picture?
I think it changes it significantly in some swing states. I'm thinking about Pennsylvania, most notably Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. I'm thinking maybe a little bit about Ohio, Cleveland, Cincinnati, some other urban areas that can turn out, because that was a problem for Joe Biden, is that he was losing support among the demographics that brought him to the White House in the first place. So I think it's going to be significant. I also understand that the fundraising boom, the small dollar fundraising boom, has been driven by a lot of these voters. For example, the 44,000 black women who were on a call with Kamala Harris on, or who were raising money for Kamala Harris on Sunday afternoon, followed by black men, 100,000 of them. Between the two groups, they raised $3 million. And that's not small change, especially given the fact that this is going to be marginal race, and we need, people need a ground game. They need go-to people. So the thing that I would respond to, though, I mean, Eric said earlier that you really can't picture dollars as support. I would beg to differ on that, given the fact that most of this is small dollar donations, and
I never said
they had
that.
100,000 people sign up for volunteers to door knock, to canvass, to phone bank. So I think it is translating into some solid support. I'm not sure it's a sugar high. I think it's going to be a little bit more sustained than that. And I think it's going to carry her through, because we haven't seen energy like this since 2008. And we all know what happened then.
Joe, I said $200 million caught the Republicans by surprise. It's a massive haul. They didn't see that coming. I didn't say it didn't have an effect. I said that.
Well, no, I thought that what you said was that that dollars don't translate into support. That the people who donate are the same ones that go out and vote.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move back to Niambi. Niambi, I want to get back to something that Eric was talking about earlier on, was the statement that J.D. Vance made in 2021. It was during an interview with Fox News about cat people and childless women, etc. Let's watch it.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. The entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
So he said afterwards, after that interview, that he was being sarcastic, but it's come back into the news. And listening to what he says there, I mean, what does that tell you about the Republican Party, with him in it, and Donald Trump at
Well, look, I mean, J.D. Vance has shown himself to be right of Donald Trump. I mean, he is really going hard. He's campaigned hard, right? He's gone from calling Donald Trump America's Hitler to now saying basically the same things. And I think there's this sort of disdain in that, because the childless cat lady, right, trope is one that I think speaks to this larger dismissal of women. One, from being able to make decisions about their own bodies, whether it be IVF or contraception or abortion, to choosing not to have children, as if people without children have less of a stake. And because they don't subscribe to, say, a traditional life, right, in the way that they've envisioned, which is husband, wife, and children, or some other such thing, then they are miserable and they don't like the choices that they make. But it also dismisses the ways that we create families now. And I think this is that disconnect, right? Because I'm one of those childless women, but I have plenty of children that I love, that I care for, that I caregive for. I have nephews and nieces and an extended family, but it assumes that the choice to not have children has something to do with being unhappy or not being able to sustain a life that they would suggest is the best life. No, it's about the fact that women now have choices to create different kinds of lives. And so I think those kinds of gaffes, or whatever we want to call them, will continue to bite J.D. Vance, particularly as he becomes more strident on abortion, suggesting that there should be no reasonable exception for abortion. I don't think these things are going to serve J.D. Vance well, and I don't know that there's any way we could have misconstrued what we heard. And I think what's happening over and over with Republicans, and why it's making people uncomfortable, is because they're saying, don't listen to what I say. Right? And it's like, okay, so what do we go by? Well, if what you do, that's also dangerous.
Listening to what they say, and I mean, these things are connected, reproductive rights and not having children or deciding to have children, whatever the case may be. So that means that the female vote is going to be vitally important in this election, and minds are going to be changed.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've already seen it in some cases, right, where we've seen abortion on the ballot at the states, right? Donald Trump said, hey, this is a state issue, and women have rejected attempts to restrict their access to abortion. I think this is going to be on the minds of a lot of women. I think we saw it after 2016 where women, I mean, because let's be clear, white women voted for Donald Trump. I mean, he made inroads again in 2020. But women started to regret some of those choices and said, I don't know that this is exactly where I want to go. So maybe I don't agree on all of these other issues with Kamala Harris or the Democrats, but on this issue, I'm actually really concerned, particularly for people who have to create families through things like IVF or adoption, etc.
Rina, we're running out of time, but I want to get to the search for a running mate for Kamala Harris. That's now intensifying. They've told us, the campaign's told us we should know something by the first week of August. What should she be looking for, and who would you be looking for?
Well, the Veep stakes is on, but if I were advising the Harris campaign, I would say wait until the convention. Because number one, I liked her statement on the day that Joe Biden dropped out, where she said she intends to earn the nomination. I thought that was sort of a signal to say she was open to an open convention, because I think an open convention, if there's even any contest from the floor to Harris, I think it makes Democrats look stronger and better. But look, it's looking like that won't be the case.
Well, shouldn't it be an open convention? Because you just reminded me of something else. She didn't win a single delegate in 2019, and now she's the top runner for president.
Well,
How did that happen?
and look, people wanted Biden to drop out, by and large, I think, because look at the state delegations that immediately on that very day went ahead and pledged their full slate of delegates to Harris. So I think the energy is behind her, the momentum is there, but I think she could wait to select until the convention and really make Republicans' heads spin. Because I bet Trump is wishing he waited even just 3-4 more days.
Okay, you haven't given me a name. Niambi, do you have a name?
I don't, but I think it's going to be somebody from a swing state. I think it's going to be a man. I think it's going to be a white man, more particularly. And I think, you know, the names that have been thrown out there, Bashir, Kelly, Shapiro, right, we've all seen them. I think they have their pluses and their minuses. But, I mean, VPs are important, sort of, but they don't really bring states to people, but it can make you look stronger in certain areas where you may be weak, and we know she does have some vulnerabilities. Okay, Joseph, I've got 20 seconds. What's your pick for VP?
A white male from a swing state.
Okay, that's great. Eric, you want to venture a guess?
Yeah, it should be Josh Shapiro, so she can say I'm not anti-Jew. She picked a Jew, and then she can go hard on what they're doing in Gaza, and that's what they need.
Right. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.